The burial and village silence. The sky pressed down like a lid. Gray. Thick. Suffocating. No rain came, though the air tasted of it, damp and metallic, clinging to the back of the throat. The kind of day where light struggled to exist, where even noon felt like dusk. They buried what remained of Carl on the edge of the village cemetery, beneath a crooked elm whose roots had begun to surface like arthritic fingers clawing free of the earth. The grave was small. Too small. Alex had stared at it for 20 minutes before the service began, her mind unable to reconcile the size of the hole with the enormity of what it would contain. The villagers came, but they did not speak. 40, maybe 50 of them, dressed in dark wool and darker expressions, standing in loose clusters around the burial site. They kept their distance from the grave itself, forming a perimeter that felt less like support and more like quarantine. No one said the baby's name. Not once. The priest, an old man with hands that trembled even in summer, murmured his prayers so softly that Alex couldn't make out the words. His lips moved in rapid, anxious patterns, eyes fixed on the ground rather than the casket. When he sprinkled earth over the tiny box, his movements were hurried, perfunctory, as though he feared lingering too long might draw attention. Attention from what, he did not say. But everyone knew. Alex stood at the graveside, Jason's arm around her shoulders, less an embrace than a structural support, the only thing keeping her upright. She couldn't feel her legs. Couldn't feel much of anything except the terrible, hollow ache that had carved out her insides and left her a shell, a puppet going through motions she didn't understand. She tried to cry. Nothing came. Behind her, the villagers whispered to each other in voices barely louder than breath. Not condolences. Not sympathy. She caught fragments, half-words that dissolved before they could form meaning. Should have known. The rules exist for. Never say it. Never. Jason's grip on her shoulder tightened until it hurt. She welcomed the pain. It was something real, something to anchor her to a world that had become untethered and strange. The service ended without ceremony. The priest backed away from the grave first, making a gesture that might have been a blessing or a warning sign, Alex couldn't tell which. The villagers dispersed like smoke, moving quickly toward the road, toward their homes, toward anywhere but here. Within minutes, only she and Jason remained, standing beside the mound of fresh earth that would settle and sink over the coming weeks, marking where their son had been laid to rest. Or what was left of him. Alex turned to leave, her legs moving on instinct, carrying her toward the cemetery gate. That's when she heard it. A whisper. Soft as wind through grass, closest breath against her ear. It might have been her name. It might have been Carl's. She couldn't tell. She didn't turn around. The house after loss. The house remembered. That's what it felt like to Alex as they stepped through the front door, that the house itself held memories in its walls, in its floorboards, in the way certain rooms held onto cold even when the fire burned bright. It was too quiet. Before, there had always been sound. Carl's small noises, the snuffling breaths, the occasional cry, the rustle of him moving in his crib. Even in sleep, he had filled the silence with life. Now there was nothing. Jason moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects without purpose, the back of a chair, the windowsill, the mantel above the fireplace. He hadn't slept properly in days. Dark crescents hung beneath his eyes, and his skin had taken on a waxy, yellowish quality that made him look decades older. Carl's room remained untouched. Alex couldn't go near it. Even walking past the closed door made her chest constrict, made her breath catch and her vision blur. She took to using the other hallway, the longer route, even though it made no sense. Jason noticed but said nothing. Night fell with an almost vindictive swiftness. They sat in the living room, not speaking, not touching, occupying the same space while remaining entirely alone. Alex stared at the fire. Jason stared at nothing. At 10 o'clock, Jason went to bed. At midnight, Alex followed. She didn't sleep. Neither did he. They lay side by side in the darkness, listening. The house settled around them with its usual nighttime sounds, beams contracting, pipes ticking, the soft groan of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. Except the floorboards in the hallway creaked as though someone were walking across them. Slow. Deliberate. A measured pace that moved from one end to the other, then stopped. No one was there. Alex knew this. Had to know this. The house was empty. But her heart hammered anyway. The curtains in their bedroom moved, a gentle swaying motion visible in the pale moonlight seeping through the window. No breeze came through the glass. No draft from beneath the door. But the curtains moved. In the nursery, 2 rooms away, door closed, the baby monitor crackled to life. Static. White noise. Then, underneath it, so faint Alex thought she might be imagining it, a soft, rhythmic sound. Not quite breathing. Not quite movement. Something in between. The same sound she'd heard the night Carl was taken. Jason sat bolt upright in bed, his hand shooting out to grip her arm. "Do you hear that?" His voice was hoarse, strangled. She nodded, unable to speak. They sat frozen, listening to the monitor's static-laced whisper, until Jason finally threw back the covers and stumbled into the hallway. Alex heard him open the nursery door, heard his sharp intake of breath, heard him stand there for a long moment before returning. "Nothing," he said. But his hands were shaking. "Something followed us back," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "From the forest. Something followed us back." Village folklore revealed. Jason went to see Mrs. Holloway the next morning. She lived on the far side of the village, in a stone cottage that predated most of the other buildings by at least a century. The village's unofficial keeper of stories, of histories no one wanted to remember but couldn't afford to forget. She answered the door before he knocked, as though she'd been expecting him. "Come in," she said. Not welcoming. A statement of fact. The interior was dim, cluttered with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and shelves lined with jars Alex couldn't identify. Mrs. Holloway gestured to a chair at the small kitchen table and set about making tea neither of them would drink. "You want to know," she said, her back to him. "Yes." She was silent for a long time, her gnarled hands moving slowly through the ritual of tea preparation. When she finally sat down across from him, her eyes were roomy but sharp. "Zuzu is not summoned," she began, her voice low and measured. "It is invited. Do you understand the difference?" Jason shook his head. To summon is to call something that isn't there. To invite is to open a door for something that's always been waiting. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. It doesn't hunt randomly. It answers names. Specifically, it answers when a name is spoken with intention, emotion, love or fear or grief, the strong things. The things that carry weight. We never meant to. Doesn't matter. Her tone was flat, absolute. It takes what is loved most. That's how it feeds. Not on flesh, on loss. On the hole left behind. Jason felt something cold settle in his stomach. "This has happened before," Mrs. Holloway continued. "Long ago. Before you were born. Before your parents were born. A young couple. A child. Same story, different names. She met his eyes. The village learned to be silent after that. Learned the rules. What rules? Never speak of it directly. Never use the name more than necessary. And never, ever say it 3 times. She leaned forward slightly. 3 times is an invitation it cannot refuse. Jason's mouth went dry. What happens if it comes? Simple. Terrifying. And once it comes, it never truly leaves. It heard your house once. It knows your voices now. It knows the shape of your grief. The silence that followed was suffocating. What do we do? Jason finally asked. Mrs. Holloway looked at him with something that might have been pity. You survive. You stay silent. You don't invite it back. Alex's mental breakdown. Alex heard her son crying on the 4th night after the burial. She woke to the sound, that distinctive newborn wail, the one that had dragged her from sleep countless times before. Instinct moved her legs before consciousness fully returned, carrying her into the hallway before she remembered. Before she understood. The hallway was empty. The nursery door was closed. But she heard him. Clearly. Unmistakably. She stood frozen, her hand halfway to the doorknob, her mind fracturing along familiar fault lines. This wasn't possible. Carl was gone. Carl was buried. Carl was... The crying stopped. Alex stood there for 5 full minutes before returning to bed. Jason was still asleep, or pretending to be. She didn't tell him. The next morning, she smelled baby soap while washing dishes, that gentle, powder-soft scent she'd used during bath time. The bottle sat unopened in the bathroom cabinet. She checked. Twice. That afternoon, she saw a handprint on the kitchen window. Small. Perfect. The size of an infant's palm, pressed against the glass from the outside. Except the window was on the 2nd floor. And it was fogged, as though formed by warm breath against cold glass. Alex wiped it away with trembling hands and didn't look at the window for the rest of the day. She began apologizing to empty rooms. I'm sorry, she whispered to the nursery door. I'm sorry. To the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, endless litanies of apology that changed nothing, solved nothing, but poured out of her anyway. Jason found her standing in Carl's room one evening, though she had no memory of opening the door or walking inside. She was staring at the crib, her lips moving silently. Alex. She didn't respond. Alex. He touched her shoulder and she flinched violently, her eyes focusing on him as though seeing him for the first time in hours. What were you saying? He asked carefully. Nothing. But that night, Jason woke to her voice, a whisper in the darkness, words he couldn't quite make out until his sleep-fogged mind sharpened enough to catch one. Zuzu. Once. Just once. But the house heard. The temperature dropped so suddenly Jason's breath misted in the air. The walls creaked, not settling, but contracting, as though the house itself were drawing in breath. Outside, the constant nighttime sounds of the forest, insects, small animals, wind through leaves, cut off with surgical precision. Total silence. Jason grabbed Alex's shoulders and shook her awake, harder than he meant to. Don't, he hissed. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. Alex stared at him, confusion and something else, something hollow and distant, moving behind her eyes. I didn't, she whispered. But she had. And something had listened. Signs that Zuzu was near. The scratches appeared the next morning. Jason found them while checking the exterior walls, long, deep gouges in the wood beneath Carl's window. For parallel lines, as though made by claws or fingers, dragging downward from the sill to the ground. Fresh. The wood was pale where it had been torn, sap still weeping from the wounds. He told Alex he was repairing weather damage. She didn't believe him. Carl's window began opening by itself. Not all the way, just a few inches, enough to let in the cold night air and the whisper of wind that sounded too much like breathing. Jason locked it. Nailed it shut. It didn't matter. He would wake to find it open again. One morning, Alex came downstairs to find footprints in the ash that had spilled from the fireplace. Not human. Too long, too narrow, the toe placement wrong. They led from the hearth to the center of the room, then simply stopped, as though whatever made them had dissolved into air. Alex swept them away before Jason woke. The village stopped visiting entirely. No one came to offer condolences or assistance. When Jason went into town for supplies, people crossed the street to avoid him. Conversations died when he approached. Eyes slid away, refusing to meet his. Only old Mr. Chen, who ran the general store, spoke to him, and only briefly, in a voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't need to be called again," he said as he bagged Jason's purchases, not looking at him. "It remembers." Then he handed Jason his change and turned away, the conversation over. Animals refused to come near the house. The birds that used to nest in the eaves were gone. The neighbor's cat, which used to sun itself on their porch, now fled hissing if it so much as saw their property. Even insects seemed to avoid the area, no flies on the windows, no spiders in the corners. The house had become a dead zone. A place where life refused to tread. The warning. Jason stood in the hallway at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, unable to rest, unable to do anything but listen to the house breathe around him. Alex was asleep, finally, mercifully unconscious after 3 days of barely closing her eyes. He'd heard her crying earlier, soft sobs muffled by her pillow, but hadn't known what to say, what to do. There were no words for this. No comfort that could touch the wound they both carried. He stared at Carl's door. Closed. Always closed now. From inside, he heard it. A soft breath. Delicate. Barely audible. The sound of an infant breathing in sleep. Jason's heart stopped. Every rational thought screamed that it was impossible, that Carl was gone, that this was his mind fracturing under grief and exhaustion. But the sound continued, a gentle inhale, a slow exhale, the rhythm of peaceful sleep. His hand moved toward the doorknob. He froze. Behind him, close, so close he should have felt breath on his neck, something whispered. Not his name. Not Alex's. Not Carl's. Just 2 words, spoken with terrible clarity. 3 times. Jason spun around. The hallway was empty. But the air held a weight it hadn't possessed moments before, a presence that pressed against his skin like invisible hands. The breathing from Carl's room had stopped. The house was silent again. But Jason understood, with absolute certainty, that the silence was not empty. Something was in it. Something was waiting. And it had just reminded him of the rules.